welcome to the n-Lorem podcast series, a series that focuses exclusively on patients now referred to as having nanorare mutations. I'm Stan Crook, and I'm the founder, chairman, and CEO of n-Lorem. n-Lorem is a nonprofit foundation that I initiated in January of 2020. Our mission at n-Lorem is to take advantage of the technology we created at Ionis Pharmaceuticals, Antisense technology, or ASO technology, to discover, develop, and provide experimental ASO treatments to nanorare patients, and to do that for free for life.
This episode of the n-Lorem Patient Empowerment Program podcast is proudly sponsored by Hanjin Biotech. With more than 26 years of experience in the nucleic acid industry, Hanjin is a specialized CDMO and raw material supplier committed to providing high-quality and high-value products and services with the best-in-class lead times. For the n-Lorem Foundation, N of 1 doesn't mean alone because every patient matters. Hope for nanorare patients and their families has never been more within reach. Visit n-Lorem.org today to donate and make hope possible.
In a previous podcast, I suggested that each of us is much more than a collection of cells. Rather, each of us is a society of several trillion cells that, for the most part, follow societal rules and often sacrifice themselves to support the survival and success of the society formed by the cells that we recognize as a human being. But to form and be successful, members of a society must communicate. So the cells that make you who you are must be able to talk to one another. And today, I plan to summarize, or at least get underway, with summarizing the ways in which your cells talk to each other. And I think you'll find this an interesting and fun topic to think about. Okay, so key point. Because our cells establish a complex society that has the goal of creating and maintaining an entity trillions of times larger than any single cell, a human being, our cells must communicate constantly. Both long-distance conversations and conversations between neighboring cells are critical, and there are multiple mechanisms to assure that the necessary communication can be effected. Of course, you know that you're comprised of various organs, but have you ever asked why you have organs, how they form, or how cells in the organ work together, or how organs coordinate their activities to assure that you have a happy, healthy life? Well, life on Earth begins as a single cell, and all of us begin as a single cell. But not every organism forms a society of cells, and not every organism on Earth has specialized organs. Sponges, sea sponges, are multicellular organisms in which the cells are all basically the same. That is, that there's no differentiation of cells to do specific jobs and no organ-like structures. In fact, you can think of a sponge like a big condominium in which cells cohabit but don't really interact socially. It isn't really essential to form a society of cells to be successful, to be a successful multicellular species. Sponges, are quite happy with their existence. I suppose the answer to the question of how successful a single-cell organism is versus a multicell, and how successful a sponge-like solution is relative to a society of solution, really depends on, your evolutionary perspective. And it seems that evolution concluded that multicellular organisms that can form societies and develop a range of new skills is a more successful approach than a condominium of cells. Certainly, the solution to form a society of cells is a lot more interesting than being a sponge. So most multicellular organisms form society of cells that can work together to support a greater, more versatile entity than the sponges. We were able to perform at the level humans do because we have a program that supports differentiation from a single cell, the fertilized egg, into many different types of cells with highly specialized functions. So in contrast to sponge cells, which simply can reproduce the same cell and create a condo of sponges cells, in utero, we both grow in cell number and differentiate into an amazing variety of cells with specialized functions. So key point, multicellular organisms can form agglomerations of cells like sponges or a society of cells like humans. Societies of cells are evolutionarily advantaged because the cells can cooperate and do more and even learn how to do new tasks. Another key point, because our cells must collaborate in many ways, communication between cells is essential. Of course, the first human cell, which is the fertilized egg, must have all the genetic information necessary to make all the types of cells that we need as adult humans. And each different type of cell is created by turning some genes on and other genes off. And in the process, we create integrated circuits or pathways that make human cells a specific type of cell and define what that cell can do, what it cannot do, and often where it lives. So a key point, though we begin as a single cell, we rapidly differentiate into an astonishing array of specialized cells that have unique properties and unique functions. And the first cell, the fertilized egg, has all the genetic information required to create all the types of cells in our body. And these are, if you look at these cells under a microscope and look at what they do, they are stunningly different. But they're all created from the same genetic basis. And they're created because we have sophisticated programming in our cells that orders some genes to be turned on to make their gene product and others to turn off. And that then creates these unique pathways and circuits that cells depend on to their differentiated functions. But you could ask, okay, I can see that. You can form a bunch of different types of cells and they can hang out, but why create organs? Well, again, there's no real answer to that, but I think the likely answer is pretty simple. If you plan to take a single cell and convert that cell into many types of specialized cells, it just makes sense to collect each type of specialized cell in a specific site in the body so that they can work together to meet the needs of the whole organism. Once you embark on creating a society of cells, it just seems to make sense to collect those specialized cells in different organs of the body so they can work together and so they can respond more as a collective of cells to various signals from other organs. Well, irrespective of why or how evolution created multicellular organisms like humans, we clearly have specialized cells, and they are clearly collected into a number of different organs. To give us shape and support mobility, we have the skeletal system. To the skeletal system, we attach muscle cells, and they're naturally called skeletal muscles. And so that we can move these two solid organs, skeletal muscle and the tendons that connect them to the skeleton, work together so that we can move and have the mobility that we have. But obviously, there has to be a third organ involved, and of course, that's the central nervous system, because the central nervous system decides where we need to move, how we need to move, and it tells the muscle cells and the skeleton what to do. So there is central control of those processes. Now, to protect us from the external world, we develop an organ that we all know very well called the skin. It is the largest organ in the body, and it's a really very complex organ. It does some remarkable things. And to see, we develop an extension of the brain with specialized cells designed to respond to light, retinal cells that are in the eye. And then inside the skin, we collect various organs that pump blood supply oxygen to tissues, and do other functions. And that includes the cardiovascular system, the lungs, that provide oxygen and to our blood cells and get rid of CO2 for us, and then to assure that we can nourish ourselves. Inside our skin, we have a GI tract. And to get rid of the waste, we have the liver, the kidney, and the lungs to manage different kinds of waste. And another function of the skeletal system is it's designed to protect all those internal organs from injury. And that's why you have a bony chest, because the heart and the lungs are pretty important. Within the rest of your body cavity, you have all these visceral organs that do all the kinds of work that we need to do to stay alive. The viscera are collected inside the skin and generally protected by the skeletal system. And to manage all those organs and the enormously important activities that they engage in, we have a specialized nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. And it's called an autonomic nervous system because it works even without your thinking about it. You never have to think, oh, gee, I have to breathe right now. You never have to consciously think about your heart beating or your blood pressure rising when you stand up. That's all done for you by your autonomic nervous system. And so clearly, there's a ton of cooperation between multiple organs. We also have organs that I think should be considered organs that are not solid. They're liquid. One is blood. Blood is a collection of cells and blood plasma, and blood itself plays a significant role in managing our life. And of course, we have lymph, which is sort of gooey, but still a liquid. It doesn't have a solid form, and yet it plays an important role in our lives. So organs can look very different, be very different. Some are solid, most are, but there are liquid organs as well. Now, each organ has a main function, but almost always organs have additional ancillary functions, additional roles that they have to fill. Take the kidney. The kidney's main job, of course, is to get rid of water-soluble waste in urine, but it works with the lung to regulate the pH of our blood, which is a matter of life and death. Any real shift in your pH and you're in real trouble. And it works with the heart, the cardiovascular system to control blood pressure. The brain makes and processes electrical signals that support cognition and manages all the things that we have to do on an automatic basis through the autonomic nervous system. And all of the things that we actively think about doing, moving, walking, talking, and all of that. So it's got a big job. The liver sits on the main path of entry for nutrients into the body. And its main job is to make sure that anything dangerous that makes its way out of our gut is removed and metabolized before it can get to the rest of the body. It also is responsible for clearing all kinds of outside products called xenobiotics or anything that looks threatening from our body and delivering those metabolites and that waste into bile so that you get rid of it in feces. That's its main job. Its main job is to get rid of bad stuff, but it also has a lot of other roles. It makes a whole bunch of different proteins, including albumin, the most prevalent protein in the blood, without which you would do very poorly, and proteins that actually behave by telling other organs what to do. And we'll come back to that. The bony skeleton provides physical support, protects our internal organs, supports our movement and our ability to be mobile, but it also, in the bone marrow, makes blood cells, and so on. So while one can simplify a statement about an organ and say the liver is responsible for protecting us from noxious chemicals, and the kidney is responsible for making urine and getting rid of water-soluble waste, it's not that simple. These organs have many, many other functions as well. So we are complex organisms made up of organs, and those organs have to work together. Those organs must talk to one another. And within each organ, there are billions of cells, and those cells have to talk to one another as well. on an ongoing basis because they share a function. So what kind of communication do we have? Well, we have long-distance communication. That is communication from one organ to another organ. There are two major long-distance communication processes. The first is electrochemical communication. Electrical signals converted to chemical signals. So it's called electrochemical. So our organs all are equipped with nerves. And our nerves allow our organs to communicate to the central nervous system electrocemically, and allow the CNS to communicate with each organ electrochemically. Electrochemical circuits are then established and maintained by our nervous system. These circuits are called electrochemical because they transmit a signal electrically in nerves. Then at the end of the nerve, that electrical signal is converted to a chemical signal. The brain and spinal cord constitute the central nervous system. The CNS is responsible for analyzing, integrating all the electrical signals that come from the various organs and sending electrical instructions to all the organs in the body. Retinal cells of the eye, their job is to respond to light. They respond to light and convert it to an electrical signal, which is transmitted through the optic nerve to the optic centers in the brain for analysis and processing. The brain sends electrical signals to the eye via the optic nerve to tell the eye to move, or so that we can look left or right or up or down. And it also signals for the eye to constrict the pupil if the light is really bright, or to dilate the pupil if the light is really low. The nose responds to odors by converting them into electrical signals that are processed by the olfactory centers of the brain. The brain sends electrical signals to skeletal muscles. Those electrical signals are converted to a chemical signal that stimulates the muscle to move. And as the muscles move and interact with the environment, they send signals back to the brain to support maintaining balance and to recognize when they're experiencing pain or irritation and to step away from that. So the key point is that traffic between the brain and the peripheral organs is very much a two-way street. And every solid organ has the ability to communicate to and from the brain via electrochemical circuits. So key point, one means of long-distance communication between organs is the communication that goes on between the central nervous system and organs. That communication is electrochemical, and it's very much a two-way street. The brain receives signals from every one of our organs to help it understand what's going on in the environment, analyze, and prepare to respond to changes in the environment. And then the organs receive directions from the central nervous system that support a societal response to changes in the environment. Our autonomic nerves control heart rate, blood pressure, and other visceral functions like urination. And it's called autonomic because we don't have to think about those activities. They take place whether we think about them or not. And that's a good thing because without them, we wouldn't be alive. The autonomic nervous system is broken up into two broad groups of nerves. One group is called adrenergic, the other is called cholinergic. And those words are really simple in meaning. One set of nerves, the adrenergic, secrete a chemical at the end of the nerve called epinephrine or norepinephrine. The other set of nerves secrete a chemical called acetylcholine. So they're called cholinergic. That is, they secrete acetylcholine, or adrenergic, after adrenaline, the other name for epinephrine. And just as a general rule, you can think of the autonomic nervous system, the adrenergic and cholinergic systems, as being yin and yang. Generally, if the cholinergic system stimulates the organ, it does A. If the adrenergic system stimulates an organ, it does B, and A and B are usually opposed. So the cholinergic nerves may cause the blood vessels to relax, causing a reduction in blood pressure. The adrenergic nerves cause the blood vessels to constrict, causing an increase in blood pressure. Adrenergic nerves cause the heart rate to go up, cholinergic nerves slow the heart rate down, and so on and so on. So that's the electrochemical circuit. It is complex. It is bilateral. That is organ to CNS, CNS to organ communication. It's constant. It's extremely rapid. Why should you have a nervous system? Well, it's faster to send an electrical signal than a chemical signal. Electricity moves faster, and so you have to have a nervous system if you want to respond rapidly. Now, the other form of long-distance communication is called just chemical, and there are a variety of chemical circuits that are established, and that chemical system for organ-to-organ communication is called the endocrine system. And I'm sure you know that the endocrine organs secrete what we call hormones. And there are many hormones. Some are made by peripheral organs, and some are actually made by the central nervous system or an appendage of the central nervous system. The way then to think of the endocrine system is that it's a network of organs. We call them, many of them we call endocrine glands, because that's a term that was used since people figured out that they secreted things that produce and release a wide range of hormones. Those hormones, once released, are collected by blood, travel to the various organs, interact with the organs and produce whatever effects they need to produce. The pituitary gland is an extension of the central nervous system. It's located at the basal base of the brain. And in many cases, you can think of it as sort of the master hormonal organ, because it controls the levels of hormones released from many other organs. It also releases hormones that affect brain function as well. Though the pituitary independently release some hormones like vasopressin and oxytocin, in many cases, almost every other case, the pituitary sends a chemical that says to a distal organ, release that hormone you have stored up. And so that the signals from the pituitary to other organs are intermediary signals that tell that organ to release the chemical that they make. But the pituitary is responsible for assuring that we respond to changes in the availability of water, yet maintain our blood volume and the concentration of solutes like sodium in the blood. And we desperately need that since there are many humans live in very wet climates, very snowy climates. Many humans live in very arid climates. And the way the pituitary does that is by responding to changes in blood and blood volume. It secretes a hormone called vasopressin that causes the kidney to conserve water by reabsorbing more of it. And that's why the common name for vasopressin is the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Diuresis is the act of urinating, and so if you have an ADH secretion, you are going to produce less urine. So the pituitary sends vasopressin to the kidney to tell it to save water. It also can secrete oxytocin in response to sensory stimuli like touch. Thus, in response to a woman's breast being touched by her baby, oxytocin is released, and that stimulates release of milk. So the pituitary is a busy center of communications. The control that the pituitary exercises is really pretty remarkable to me. The kinds of effects that the pituitary can have are impressive. It can release a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone, or TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And if the thyroid releases T3 or T4, the hormones made by the thyroid, that stimulates metabolic rate. Thyroid hormones also increase the efficiency of calorie use by supporting more aerobic energy metabolism, and that prepares you to be more active, to use your muscles in a more effective way. The pituitary also affects heart rate through stimulating the release of thyroid hormone from the thyroid. And so the heart rate increases. So overall, You're a much more energetically fit human being when the pituitary tells the thyroid to secrete its hormones. The pituitary regulates growth by secreting growth hormone, and that also increases bone length and density, and also has metabolic effects that alter the use of glucose. So growth hormone has some major effects. And if things go wrong, you become a giant or you become a dwarf. And being a giant is more than simply being big. It means you have a growth hormone problem and your bones are not just longer, they're thicker, and you probably look different. The pituitary also regulates immune responses. Obviously, you constantly have to respond to threats in the environment, infectious threats that are constant. The pituitary releases a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, big word meaning a chemical that causes the adrenal glands to secrete steroids, corticosteroids. So when the pituitary tells the adrenals to secrete cortisol, what it does is it tells the immune system to shut down, to stop responding so aggressively to one stimulus or another. And in addition to that, it produces euphoria. If you're ever taking steroids, you can feel really good on corticosteroids. It causes weight gain. Your appetite goes up. It causes water retention. It's associated with lots of effects, including thinning of the bones, causing osteoporosis. The pituitary is in charge of how big you are, how metabolic active you are, whether you're able to respond to infectious diseases, kind of an important organ. It also, the pituitary, controls sex hormones by sending chemicals to the ovaries and the testes saying, release your hormones. And of course, that leads to the various sexual characteristics that we have. And finally, the pituitary can release hormones that make us feel better, more gratified. They're called endorphins. These are natural opioids, and they create a sense of pleasure. They reduce pain, and because it feels pretty good, that can lead to addictive behaviors in certain people, in the people who have a system that is especially responsive to it. Key point, the pituitary is the master long-distance communicator via a variety of chemical messengers, we call those hormones, that can affect essentially every organ in your body and can dramatically change what you're able to do, what you're willing to do, and how you feel about what you do. That is why the pituitary is considered so important and why pituitary tumors can be so problematic and produce different kinds of syndromes depending on where the tumor is in the pituitary. A tumor in one part of the pituitary might make extra growth hormone and you become a giant. Another part of the pituitary might oversecrete vasopressin and you might end up retaining too much water, and so on and so on. Once again, you can think of the pituitary as the CEO of chemical communications between organs, but other organs talk to one another as well. And usually in those conversations, there's a hierarchy. There's a boss and a worker relationship with one organ ordering the other organ to do something. For example, the liver makes two proteins called EPO, erythropoietin, and TPO, thrombopoietin. EPO orders bone marrow to make more red blood cells, which increases the ability of blood to carry oxygen. This is why long-distance bike racers, really like to take EPO because they obviously need to carry a lot of oxygen in their blood, and that's why it's alcohol. TPO tells the bone marrow to make more platelets, increasing the potential for blood clots. So now you have, in addition to the pituitary ordering organs around, you have individual organs ordering each other around chemically. Corticosteroids are released by the adrenals, and they order the immune system to take a break, increasing the chance of infections while reducing undesired inflammation. And why are some patients taking corticosteroids? Because the inflammatory system can go awry, you can have an inflammatory disease, and corticosteroids can step in and stop that. Tragically, of course, long-term use of corticosteroids is associated with lots of side effects because corticosteroids do many things to the body. Key point, long-distance communication via the chemical network is typically thought of as hormonal communication, is typically thought of as a part of the endocrine process. But as I've mentioned, many organs talk to one another chemically all the time. And many of these organs we don't think of as endocrine, but they have endocrine functions, the liver, the kidney, the bone marrow, and others. Returning to endocrine activities of non-endocrine organs, that is, the things like the liver and the kidney. These communications are important as well as the communication between the pituitary and various endocrine organs, as I mentioned. The kidney, its primary role, of course, is to make urine, but it secretes lots of different chemical messengers that have an effect on other organs. Angiotensinogen, converted to angiotensin, leads to vasoconstriction, narrowing the blood vessel, and causes an increase in blood pressure. Renin is also secreted by the kidney and does similar things. The gut is also an active endocrine organ. Of course, the pancreas makes insulin, and for decades that's been known, and insulin directs the rest of the organs, particularly the skeletal muscle, to use glucose in a certain way. And if something is wrong with your secretion of insulin, then you can have diabetes or you can be hypoglycemic and all of these things. But it's not the only part of the gut that secretes chemicals that are important. Secretes, among other things, GLP-1, which it encourages you to stop eating. That's called satiety, and reduces blood sugar. And so you see a lot of ads on TV these days for GLP-1 medicines because they really are pretty effective at reducing obesity and improving diabetes. And obviously, diabetes is often associated with obesity. Once again, the key point is, in addition to endocrine to organ communication, there is a lot of organ-to-organ communication from organs that are not typically thought of as endocrine. To finish up chemical point, long-distance communication is effected both by electrochemical or chemical circuits. Electrochemical circuits constitute the nervous system. Our nerves convert chemical signals to electrical signals and then convert electrical signals to chemical signals at the end of the nerve, at the organ that the nerve is innervating. This means that the CNS can receive information and order responses to information. Without it, life would be very, very difficult. Chemical circuits are established strictly by chemicals that are secreted by various organs that must travel through blood and order various organs to do various things. That's called the endocrine system. And if you think about it for just a minute, you know it's a much slower process than electrochemical. And so you can think about hormone communication as sort of a slow, long-distance process, maybe like sending Pony Express, whereas electrochemical nerves is much more like a telegraph. Finally, in the context of chemical circuits, the pituitary is a big deal. It is correctly considered the master endocrine organ because it secretes hormones like endorphins, vasopressin, oxytocin, and other hormones that tell other organs to release various other hormones. And so that then brings us to the conclusion on long-distance communication. The bottom line is that we're all societies of cells, so we must have very solid means of communicating at long distances and at short distances. Long-distance communication can either be electrochemical, that is, to organ to nerve, or chemical. Electrochemical communication is very rapid. Chemical communication, a la the endocrine system or chemicals only, is slower. And we'll break here, and then next time I'll come back and talk about local calls, conversations that go on between cells that are near each other, adjacent to each other, or even touching each other. And I hope you find that as fascinating as I do.
n-Lorem is a nonprofit committed to discovering and providing personalized experimental treatments for free, for life, to patients with genetic diseases that affect 1 to 30 patients worldwide, referred to by n-Lorem as nano-rare. Many of these patients progress and die without ever achieving a diagnosis. This is where n-Lorem comes in. They do the impossible by providing hope, and for those that they can help, free lifetime treatment. For more information about n-Lorem or today's episode, visit n-Lorem.org. Any questions can be sent into podcast@n-Lorem.org. Search n-Lorem on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook to connect with us. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allows others to find the show. This podcast is hosted by Dr. Stan Crook. Our videographer is John Magnuson of Mighty One Productions. Our producers are John Magnuson and Kira Deneen of DNA Today. Thank you for listening.